Welcome back to the Art in the Garden series. My name is Celeste Scott. I'm an extension agent with the University of Tennessee in Madison County, and I'm going to be sharing with you all today a talk called Garden Jumpstart. We're going to be covering some timely tips for the garden at this time of the season. We're going to talk about pruning, planting, and some other seasonal happenings. Garden Jumpstart is what I decided to name our discussion. Timely tips for pruning, pests, and more. And if you have questions, please feel free to, you can unmute yourself and ask the question just verbally and then mute yourself right back. That is fine because I'm not going to really be able to watch the chat box as closely as I do when I'm the facilitator for the meeting, just because we've got lots of things going on. So I definitely want y'all to ask questions and be involved. So a few timely tips. Okay, let's see. Yeah, there we go. A few timely tips. And if I ever stop like that, like I just did then, it's because I'm allowing people into the meeting from the waiting room. So that's what's happening there. So this is a lovely picture of some peonies from my garden last year. Some little iris behind it. And don't forget to mute yourselves just so we don't have background noise. Okay, I think we've got everybody going. Let me change how I have this. There we go. And we're going to cover the areas that I want to talk about today are pruning. We're going to talk a little bit about propagation, fertility, insects, and veggies, because there are things that can be done in all of these areas right now. So I hope I don't get hung up on things. Sometimes I ponder too long on a particular subject, but I want to cover it thoroughly so that people have a good understanding of what we're talking about. So pruning flowering shrubs is really what I wanted to focus on today, because that's what I get the most calls and questions about. And believe it or not, there is a rule of thumb, but what do they always say about rules of thumbs? There's always an exception, right? But for the most part, you can count on this rule of thumb when trying to determine the best time for pruning many of our flowering shrubs. So pruning after they bloom is your rule of thumb. And even that can get a little tricky because you wonder, well, is this plant considered a spring flowering or a summer flowering? And so I'm going to help you out with that a bit on how to determine between those two and where exactly is that line from prune now to not prune now. Here I've included a picture of a crepe myrtle. I know it's kind of hard to see, but the one on the left was pre-pruning, and you can see how many twiggy branches there are. And the bones of that plant were just very minuscule. They were going everywhere, growing to the inside and the outside. And then over here on the right was after I did a little cleanup pruning, cut out a bunch of that twiggy growth, left those main structural limbs and branches on the crepe myrtle, and you can tell how that's been cleaned up a lot from the one on the left, instead of just doing your crepe myrtle, chopping it off at the top. So we're not going to talk really about pruning techniques today. We can save that for another time. But I did want to mention that because I know at this time of year, we are seeing that crepe myrtle happening all over the place. And in some cases, it's the only option, but we can try our best to do differently. So first I want to talk about spring flowering shrubs. And I got a list here. You can see, I mean, I know many of you have these in your gardens, and there's more that aren't even on the list. But a few that come to mind: red buds, dogwoods are blooming right now. They're kind of on the way out. Forsythia, of course, is beautiful. This the shrub with the white blooms on it down here is spirea. And of course, well, it's the Ogon spirea, the one that blooms early and then puts on the kind of chartreusey type leaves. Bridal wreath is another beauty that is blooming right now. It's kind of on the way out. Quince blooms super early. Azaleas, I hope people didn't have a lot of injury from the frost and the cold temperatures that we had a few nights ago, but I'm sure there is a little bit of injury on some of our azaleas that were beginning to come out, and the list goes on and on. But I want to show y'all a few pictures. I hope this goes right. There we go. Here's some more pictures. I knew I had them on there. Azalea. The one on the bottom right is that bridal wreath spirea that I was talking about that I love so much. It's an old-fashioned plant. Always reminds me of, my grandmother's house. The picture here on the left, that's what a lot of people refer to as a snowball bush, and it's actually a type of viburnum. I gave a class on hydrangeas about a month ago before all of this social distancing started, and we were talking about when to prune what types of hydrangeas, and the lady said, well, what about that? And she was describing it, and I said, well, that's a good question, but that's not a hydrangea. So a lot of people see it blooming. It's in full bloom right now, and that is actually a viburnum. And so with all that being said, you've got the idea of what we mean by shrubs that are spring flowering. They are flowering before July. That's where my cutoff date is for determining spring flowering plants versus summer flowering plants. So let's move on forward here a little. So with all of these types of plants here, we're going to be waiting until they have passed their peak of bloom. And that is going to be our optimum time for pruning. You don't want to wait until the fall. You don't want to prune these in late winter either, because if you do that, you'll be removing the flower buds for the following season. They actually grow those buds on new wood throughout the season, and then the following year they bloom on old wood. So if we prune off those areas where those new flower buds are being generated, we have a flowering shrub that has reduced bloom, or in many cases no bloom at all. I've seen this happen with hydrangeas many a time. A question that I get about the big leaf hydrangea, the one you see down here in the right, that's our macrophylla, is I have a macrophylla, or they usually don't know what kind it is, and they say I have a hydrangea and it never blooms. And it's because they, or whoever is pruning their shrubbery, is cutting off all of the blooming wood every year. So with these types, if they need pruning, oftentimes they don't, they're not going to need pruning every year. The only time I recommend pruning is if the plant has outgrown its space and you need to do some maintenance as far as size goes on that particular plant. And I'm going to show you an example of some non-blooming wood when we go outside on our walking tour of a macrophylla, because I have one. I'm one of those that has one. So we want to, if we need to do any pruning on these, we want to do that immediately after its peak bloom, okay? Any size reduction, that's when we want it to happen. And the reason is, so say they're blooming in May, and then we come in mid-June when their peak is past, and we do our severe pruning on size reduction. It has all of June, all of July, all of August to put on new growth. And that growth is where your flowering buds are going to be for the following year's blooms. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please speak up, because I have the chat box hidden right now so that I can see my slide. Another hydrangea that is going to benefit from pruning immediately after its peak bloom is oak leaf hydrangea. But again, they have such interesting forms. Oak leaves grow in these really kind of sprawling, interesting forms. It's not a perfect circular mound. So pruning them sometimes robs them of that particular structural beauty that they have. So I would discourage pruning an oak leaf unless it is just, super necessary to keep it contained to a certain area. All right, so we covered spring flowering. Now we'll talk a little bit about those summer flowering shrubs. Spirea japonica. I'm sure a few of you have this. It's an old standby. I have one that blooms kind of a fuchsia kind of color in the summertime. It's so beautiful. I love it. Crepe myrtles, abelias, sweet spires, rose of Sharon down here on the right, butterfly bushes, vitex bushes. And then a few more hydrangeas, we'll cover those as well. These flowering shrubs, the ones that bloom in summer, are best pruned in late winter. So we're talking late January, February. Sometimes with these changing temperatures we're having, you know, March is even getting a little close to quote unquote springtime. So pruning these plants while they're still dormant in late winter, before they've started to generate new growth, before they've started, you know, to really ramp things back up and get those juices flowing inside the plant, that is the optimum time to prune these flowering shrubs. And you may say, well, why? Because you just told us that we'd be cutting off the previous year's blooms. However, in the case of summer flowering shrubs, they bloom on new wood. So it's okay to prune them while they are dormant, and it's actually a lot healthier for them. It reduces the risk of insect infestations, taking advantage of those cut wounds and disease getting into wounds that we would face during in-season pruning. And so this is really the best time for us to cut on these types of plants. Here's some more pictures, the bottlebrush buckeye. But again, it's a rule of thumb. You can't say all buckeyes should be pruned in, because when are red buckeyes blooming? Right now. So they would fall in the spring flowering category. It's just kind of one of those things you have to roll with the punches and take them as they come. Abelia would be considered a summer blooming shrub. Up here in the right-hand corner, we've got Itea. And now we'll talk a little bit about the hydrangeas that need to be pruned while dormant. The one here on the right, that's a panicle type hydrangea, or hydrangea paniculata. The one on the left is what we would call a smooth hydrangea, or hydrangea arborescens. Both of these are going to bloom on new wood every year. So it doesn't matter, you could chop them down to the ground if you wanted to in late winter and they would still bloom. Now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't be reduced in size, because they would be. If, for example, on a panicle hydrangea, say that you're never pruning it, you're just letting it grow and grow and grow, the shrub will continue to get bigger and you'll still have blooms on the newest wood. That's why they're always here on the outside. You're not having blooms tucked way up inside the plant. If you've ever looked at a smooth hydrangea, say like an Annabelle, you know how they multiply in clusters, and it seems like all the blooms are just right here on the top, right on the very top canopy of that mass. And that's because that's where the newest wood is. So don't be afraid to cut on these if you need to. I have seen in instances where you do a lot of pruning on the panicle hydrangeas and it creates a more compact plant with fewer, larger blooms. So if that's something that you want to shoot for, you may want to do some heavy pruning on that. But again, just don't prune them. If they're growing in the space, fine. Just don't worry about them. Now, I do want to add before I move on from pruning of flowering plants that if, when I'm talking about pruning, I'm talking about like removing substantial amounts of wood or stem from the plants. I'm not talking about deadheading. Nobody wants to look at a spent panicle hydrangea bloom all fall. I mean, they don't really hold themselves up well. They can dry beautifully if you cut them and take them inside and hang them up to do some drying, but nobody wants to look at that. So you can go out and snip, deadhead those blooms off. Same goes for the Annabelle hydrangeas or those smooth type hydrangeas. Nobody wants to look at those all winter long. So don't be afraid to go ahead and remove those blooms after they've passed their peak. And the last one I want to touch just for a minute on are shrubs that produce berries. And here again, it may be a toss-up because, for instance, viburnums Some viburnums would be considered spring blooming, so we would prune them immediately after the peak of their bloom. However, if we do that, we're removing the source of their fruit, because the bloom, if it's pollinated, it matures and turns into the fruit or the berries. So if your main objective is to provide food for the wildlife or have that berry display, that is not going to be the optimum time for you to prune that particular plant. And again, if size is not the limiting factor, just don't do any pruning. But a lot of plants fall into this category. Pyracantha, winter berries, Nandina domestica has a really nice display of red berries late in the fall on into winter. Hollies, barberries, hawthorns, viburnums. So the ideal time for pruning these types of plants is going to be after that fruit has passed its prime or has been eaten all up by all the animals. All right. So that covers things for pruning. I hope that helps give you an idea about when to do what as far as pruning goes. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about propagation. Now is a great time to start doing some propagation. Dividing herbaceous perennials that are just beginning to emerge is a good practice, something that you could be out in the garden doing right now. That top picture, I believe, is from my garden. Well, these are all from my garden. That one on the top right is bee balm, Monarda, that's starting to come up. The one on the top left, I believe, was some black-eyed Susan. That's patch is just multiplying. It could use a little cleaning up. And I'm going to show y'all some ways to do that when we go outside. Layering new growth of woody plants is something that would be a good practice that you could start right now. I'll give you a quick tutorial on that. And then also taking soft wood tip cuttings. We have lots of our woody shrubs are putting on new growth at this point in time. And if you wanted to try some tip cuttings for those woody plants, you want to make sure and get that softest, most succulent growth there on the tips. So propagation is something we could spend quite a bit of time on. Fertility, I wanted to touch on fertility for a few minutes. And basically, it's let's get ready, let's get set, and let's go. Now is the time to be doing our fertilization across the board, really. Our lawns, if you have a warm season lawn, this is a great time to go ahead and get your jump start on your fertility program. I can't give you a broad suggestion on what you should be using on your turf or how much per acre or square footage, because that really depends on our soil sample results that we get. Ornamental beds, I do not test my ornamental beds every year. I test them once about every 3 or 4 years, and I just continue on with whatever that recommended fertility application was in those during that period when I'm not testing. And I'm going to show you some of those products that I use when we go outside. If you're concerned about trees, few tips on trees. Extension recommends that if a tree is planted in a lawn area, out in the middle of a lawn, and you are doing regular fertility maintenance on that turf, the trees need no extra fertility management, okay? If it's a new tree, we do not recommend putting fertilizer in the hole, and also do not amend that soil with any other porous type media like compost or anything like that. We want to loosen the native soil that's already found in that area and put it back in the hole with that plant as we are replanting. So keep those things in mind. Also, just a quick little refresher on fertilizers. They are referred to with 3 numbers. The first number, and you can see here on the bottom of the slide, is nitrogen. The second number in that combination is your phosphorus, and the last one is your potassium. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to that as NP and K. They'll say, well, I need some fertilizer, and they're like, well, what kind of NP and K do you need? That's what they mean. That's what they're referring to, is that ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus to potassium. So for example, a triple 15 would be 15, 15, 15. Now, if we think about it in our heads, when we go back to math class, and we're thinking about that in a ratio, not like actual poundage, a triple 15 would be equal to a triple 10. And that would also be equal to a triple 5 or a triple 12. And we could go on and on. As long as the ratio remained 1 to 1 to 1, that is the same fertilizer. You just have to use more or less depending on its concentration. So if we're supposed to use 3 pounds of triple 15 per 100 square feet, but you can't find triple 15, all you can find is triple 10, then you are only going to use, well, then you actually need to use 4 pounds of triple 10 to equal the same amount as what would have been recommended for a triple 15, because it's not as concentrated, so you need to use more. Hope that makes sense, but I just wanted to do a quick refresher on fertilizer before we get away from the topic. Oh, and also, when you get your recommendations, if you send in a soil sample for lawns, they're going to give you recommendations per 1,000 square feet. For ornamental plantings, they give you recommendations per 100 square feet. So make sure that you have that distinction when you're looking at the results. All right, so moving right along, I think insects comes next. I'm going to show y'all, I have some of these pests out here in my garden, but if anybody has crepe myrtles in their landscape, they probably know what this picture right here is. This is a heavily infested branch, crepe myrtle branch that has crepe myrtle bark scale on it. Crepe myrtle bark scale is a felt scale that moved into the area about, probably 5 years ago at this point, and it has just taken over our world. And if you have crepe myrtles and you're concerned about it, which you should be, because it robs the plant of all of its valuable attributes, it doesn't really threaten the life of the plant, but it makes the branches and the trunk black. It reduces the bloom, and it just makes the plant really unthrifty overall. So instead of having a nice full crepe myrtle, we're going to have something that looks pretty sickly. Now, we've collected a lot of information about crepe myrtle bark scale and on how to treat it. And again, we could spend a whole class just talking about crepe myrtle bark scale, but I wanted to give more of a quick overview of things today. So this link here, MadisonCountyMG.org. I'm going to see if that hyperlink works. Yay! It went to the web page. It worked properly. So this is our website. And as you can see at the top of the bar here, we have a link for crepe myrtle bark scale. If you click on that, it takes you to our page where we have kind of compiled everything. We've got some updates. We have a little background information about where it came from, how it got here. And then we have several video demonstrations. It can be tricky trying to determine what product to use, how much of that product to use, and how to apply it. But we have everything you need to guide you right here. For most people's cases, this multi-trunk measuring and calculating rate is going to be the video demonstration that's going to work for most of your landscape plantings. The one here that says shrub, measuring and calculating, I would only use this method if they are dwarf crepe myrtles and truly are shrubs and not small trees. That's where that shrub application could come into play, because you base the application rate off the height of the shrub and not off the diameter or circumference of the trunks. And then finally, down here at the bottom, I have a product comparison chart. I'm going to go ahead and click on that so you can see what it looks like. The top part of the chart here are all the products that you might find at a box store or at a garden center per se. They're going to come in quarts and pints. They are much less concentrated, as you can see in this column here where it says percentage. We're looking at products that have 1.47% concentration or less. and are costing us a pretty penny compared to products in this bottom part of the chart that have 21% concentrate up to 75% concentrate. So obviously these products down here are going to either have to be special ordered, or they'll have to be obtained from a farm supply type store like Co-op or R&J Feed. They do have these products in stock. Quala Pro is the liquid formulation that I know R&J Feed and Co-op in Madison County have been keeping in stock. And you will pay a little more for it up front. It's $66 for a gallon container. However, it's enough product to treat nearly 50 trees. And that's compared to some of these products up here that cost $15 to treat one tree. So that could be a big difference, and I just wanted everybody to be aware of this site and how to maneuver it and how to find the things that you need. So let me try to get back to my PowerPoint, since this is something I've not done before. I've got to stop my screen share for a minute. Okay, there we go. Back to where we left off. Another good website for reference is www.uthort.com. I'm not going to take us to that live site. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You can go there. There's a search box. You can type in all different types of search words, and it's going to give you information on treating insects or helping you identify what's going on. So we've talked enough about crepe myrtle bark scale. Now I want to touch on a few other insect pests that you might be seeing in your garden right now. I always get lots of calls about azaleas at this time, because people are, looking to their azaleas, expecting them to have a beautiful bloom, and sometimes that is not always the case. If you see an azalea, this picture here on the top on the left side is a picture of a leaf that has a heavy infestation of azalea lacebug. And what azalea lacebugs do, you can see them here on the right. They're found on the underside of the leaf, and they have piercing mouth parts, and so they are sucking the life basically out of that leaf and leaving all these little black dots behind. That's their excrement. As they're feeding, they are just continually, pooping it all out as they go. So sometimes if you look on the underside of the leaf, even if the stippling is not as severe as the picture here in the left, if you look at the underside and you see a bunch of small black dots, you know that there has at least been feeding of the azalea lacebug in the past. There may not be active activity, but you can rest assured that it has happened. And so now is the time to be treating for azalea lacebug. We can use an imidacloprid drench, which is the same product that we use for crepe myrtle bark scale that you saw on the website that we just left. There are some other foliar products that you can use in season while they're actively feeding, but it's hard to apply because you really have to coat the underside of those leaves very well in order for it to be effective. So if you have issues with that, you can always give me a call and I'll give you some guidance and tips on treating that. Euonymus scale, this picture right here in the middle with the dark green leaf and all these little white dots. Euonymus scale was so bad last year. I hope we don't have the same occurrence this go around, but it can be found on the upper sides of leaves, undersides of leaves. You'll even see those little white specks piled up on top of each other, covering the trunks and small branches of those plants. So that can be an issue. Keep an eye out for that. Also, last year at this time, I was getting lots of calls about hollies that weren't looking too good. They were just looking kind of yellowy and sickly, and went and checked on those and was seeing quite a bit of wax scale. That can be found on the undersides and occasionally on the top sides of holly leaves and other broadleaf evergreens as well. The last thing I wanted to mention as far as pests goes are be aware that there are some cool season mites that are actively feeding right now, and we may not know it. Usually we don't know that we had a problem with cool season mites until late spring or summer actually arrives, because that's when we see the damage start to present itself. Mites, just like the azalea lace bugs, have piercing mouthparts, and so they are feeding on the juices of that leaf from the underside of the leaf, and they create this stippling pattern. If you can see that bottom left picture right here, you can tell the leaf is supposed to be dark green, but it looks like there are all these little bitty yellow dots all over it, and sometimes it can be so severe that they coalesce and the whole leaf just looks chlorotic and yellow, or kind of sometimes has a silvery cast in general. So the southern red mite and the spruce spider mite are our two cool season mites that we really need to keep an eye on. So go out and check your broadleaf evergreens. Even your needled evergreens are the preferred hosts for our spruce spider mites. And if you put a white sheet of paper up underneath a limb and shake it really well, and some things will fall out on the paper, and the mites are going to look, they're so little, y'all, it's hard to see them without a hand lens or a magnifying glass, but they're like the size of they're smaller than the size of a period. Like if you were, writing and put a period at the end, it'd be about that size. So those are just a few little tips and tricks on how you can be monitoring and scouting your garden for some seasonal pests that are active right now. Uh-oh, how do we go forward? There we go. And then finally, before we go outside, I'm going to talk about veggies real quick. And look at this cute little guy over here on the right. Ain't he a cutie? That's my little lane bug. My 4-year-old little boy. He was out helping me and my dad lay plastic on our garden rows a week or so ago, and I just thought that was a cute picture and wanted to put it in there. But some things that we can talk about now are planting, and keep in mind what our soil temperatures are, because, well, I hope nobody had any warm season crops planted a few days ago, because if you did and you didn't take the necessary precautions, you probably don't have them anymore. So in our first class on when to do what, I showed y'all that frost pattern chart and how to determine when your 50% frost date is and 90% frost date. And if you did like we had discussed and followed your 50% frost date, you may have already had your tomatoes set out, but hopefully you covered them. And if you did, no worries. You can do that. You can start transplants early. That's the beauty of it. But you just have to be willing and prepared to take those necessary precautions if the temperatures drop down. So here I wanted to show you all this link. You can find this publication by going to uthort.com, and in the search box, just typing in garden planning. It's going to take you directly to this publication right here. The Tennessee Vegetable Garden, Garden Planning, Plant Preparation, and Planting. And I mentioned this publication in my last talk, but I just thought this was a good time to bring it up again. So if you go to page 2 and look at the column right here in the middle, these are the things that we are getting ready to focus on for planting in the garden. Late spring to summer planted vegetables for summer and early fall harvest. So beans, sweet corn, I know some people that already have their sweet corn planted. It probably, if it didn't get drowned out or the seed didn't rot after all that rain that we had, it may have survived those cooler temperatures. Eggplant, okra, peas, peppers, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, watermelons, and then all the muskmelons, so like cantaloupes and things of that nature. Those would all be crops the ones that we're coming up on looking towards planting. These here on the left, we've kind of passed the window for most of those. You could still do some intercropping, succession planting with lettuce. Some of those lettuces would be okay. But for the most part, we've passed that early spring season planting dates, and we're getting into the earliest times to plant these warm season crops. if you go on down here through, we've got information on transplanting and desirable temperatures for germination if you're trying to start things inside. And then obviously we need warmer temperatures for germination than we do for growing those plants out. But we've got some guidance on that. And then when you get all the way down here to the bottom, this is really the jewel right here on the last page. It has the recommended spring planting dates and fall planting dates for all of these crops. And so I want to go back to what I had mentioned earlier about let's be aware of our soil temperatures. So even if we have a few warm days and the air temperatures are in the high 80s or 90s like we had last week, that does not mean that our soil temperatures have caught up with our air temperatures yet. There's some easy ways that we can test it. If you don't have a soil tester, like a soil thermometer, you can actually just use like a meat thermometer and go out in the garden. If you are preparing to plant to direct seed, you only need to put the thermometer in the soil about an inch or whatever the depth is that you are planting those seeds, because that's the environment it's going to experience. However, if you are preparing to plant transplants, you want to take the temperature at least a 4-inch depth. And when we're talking about warm season vegetables, we're really looking at minimum temperatures being around 60 degrees, 60 to 65 for minimum soil temperatures. Natalie, I don't know how many of you follow the Tennessee Extension Master Gardener Facebook page, but Natalie Baumgardner, she shared a post that that was talking about germination of beans. And even though you can plant beans at 60 degrees, which I just said is the minimum temperature for warm season crops, you can plant them then. However, if you compare that to a bean that was planted at like 75 degrees, it will germinate twice as fast than a bean seed that was planted at 59 or 60 degree soil temperatures. So, you know, just depends on how you want to go. They may actually end up catching up with each other. So if you planted when it was cooler and it takes longer for the seed to germinate, like what good are you doing yourself? And you're also running that risk of the seed rotting while it's sitting in the soil. If we have those cool temperatures mixed with lots of rain, or you also run the risk of that that seedling germinating, reaching those ideal conditions, but it's growing off so slowly that root rot sets in. So sometimes some things can be said for holding off and doing direct seeding for a little bit until those soil temperatures really get to those optimum ranges. So I have to stop my share again so that I can get back to my presentation here. All right, and then finally, weed control. This is the time to be thinking about weed control, in not only in our vegetable gardens, but in our ornamental plantings. I'm a big advocate for using pre-emerge herbicides and mulches, mostly mulches. I don't feel like you can have a good weed control program without using both of those things in combination with each other. Now in my ornamental plantings, I do a lot of seeding, direct seeding, and then also I let things reseed themselves from year to year. So I'm very careful about where I do use pre-emerges, but they certainly have a place, I promise you, in ornamental plantings. So with all of that being said, I'm going to check the chat box real quick before we go outside, before I move it outside, and see if anybody had any chats. All right. What'd y'all think about our new Prezi presentation instead of PowerPoint? Ooh, I got all fancy on y'all. Okay, bear with me a second. I'm gonna swap from my computer to my phone, okay? Okay. Can y'all hear me still? Good. Okay. So my phone decided that I was driving and wouldn't let me turn it back on. So let me rejoin the meeting from my phone and we'll go outside. All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Can anybody see me?
We can see you.
Okay, good. All right. So we're outside at my garden. I'm trying to remember some of the things we talked about. Oh, yes. So pruning. Let me get my pruners.
I can't see you.
Oh, you can't see me? Oh, no.
Just your living room.
Well, I think it must be lagging. I was in the living room, but now, oh, maybe, is it still sharing my video from where I was sitting earlier?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go.
You're okay to me.
Can anybody see my face?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I can see
We
you.
can see you. We just see both. We see your living
Oh,
room.
okay. Oh, you see them both. Okay. Well, you're going to see the other one because I can't turn that part off. So, my hope was that, usually you see whoever is talking. So I was hoping since I was the one talking that I would be the one that everyone would be seeing. Yes.
Well, I'm getting ready to find you.
Yeah, you're good. People just need to hunt for you.
Okay, good. So
Thanks.
I've turned it around. So now hopefully you can see us. I'm just kind of walking in my yard. And here I wanted to show you, we talked about pruning and spring flowering shrubs. So this is a Weigelia that I have. And I just love Weigelia. And some people don't like it because it doesn't lend a whole lot to the garden in the way of like structure. You can tell how leggy mine is, and that's really because I've just ignored it for a few years and haven't done just a whole bunch of pruning on it. But after it blooms, you can see all these buds. This is all growth that happened last year. So after this beauty gets done with its bloom, it's just started, I'm probably going to take quite a bit of this off. And when I come in with my pruners, I'm going to try to get as close as I can without smushing my other plants. When I come in and make a cut, I'm not going to cut here in the middle. I want to cut down where you have growth coming off. And Weigelia has opposite growth. So you've got sprouts here on the right and on the left. So what I would do when that time comes, I would come right in here and clip that off. And what that does when you make that pruning cut, it actually encourages growth at the side of that cut. So I'm going to get a new branch coming off to the right and a new branch coming off to the left. I'm going to do that same process for this entire plant, and hopefully by the end of the season it'll be a much fuller plant and won't be as airy and wiry. And it's okay if you leave it like that too. So it's just kind of personal preference, however you want to do it, but I just wanted to show y'all that for example. Now you remember how we talked about some hydrangeas and how people have a lot of problems oftentimes with hydrangea that don't bloom. Now, this is a macrophylla hydrangea, a big leaf hydrangea. And in this particular situation, the wood that should be putting on new growth that would have the blooms on it should be all of these sticks that are sticking up right here. They should have new growth on them. However, they don't. And it's because this plant is an awful plant. No, I'm just kidding. One of my friends propagated this from one of their hydrangeas and gave it to me, and she didn't know what the variety or anything was. And I think that I'm really not sure what's going on with it, but each year none of the canes ever live, and it might be because I have it on the north side of my house, and so it's in a very exposed area. You can see none of those canes are alive. None of them are putting back on any sprouts off of that old wood. So this hydrangea never blooms. Now it's beautiful. By the end of the season, all this new growth here at the bottom, it grows on up great, and it's a beautiful plant. However, it's poorly placed and it never blooms. So I need to dig it up and move it, and that's just something I haven't done yet. So let's talk about another. This is Ogon spirea. It had the white blooms on it early in the spring before the leaves started coming out. So if this plant needed pruning, you can still see a few of the blooms trying to hang on. So if you needed to prune this plant, now would be the time. Mine is not as big as I want it yet, so I'm not going to prune it. But if you're going to, now would be the time. And I want to show you the inside of this plant. I don't know how good the video is, but spirea are what we consider a cane type shrub. So if I were going to prune it, I would go on the inside and I would remove canes down to the bottom to reduce size. But I think that's a pretty nice one, so we're going to leave it. And then I want to show you one more spring flowering shrub. Well, here's a good example of another one. So you remember how we talked about Annabelle or smooth hydrangea and how ugly their blooms are and how you probably don't want to look at them all winter? Well, yeah, I didn't cut mine off. So they've already started putting on new green growth, but those old, spent, ugly blooms are still there. So you could go in and remove them right now. We're just tipping them off. And they're still going to bloom properly because they bloom on what kind of wood? New wood. They bloom on new wood. Let's do one more pruning example. Does anybody have beautyberry in their garden? I do, and unfortunately, beautyberry is an alternate host for crepe myrtle bark scale. And my beautyberry has crepe myrtle bark scale in an awful, awful way. And so each year I chop it down to the ground. And you can do this even if it doesn't have crepe myrtle bark scale, because it can get pretty out of control. They grow very aggressively. And you're going to have a really nice, probably 2 or 3 foot beautyberry by the end of the season. And I probably cut mine back. If it didn't have bark scale, I probably would only cut it back every 2 or 3 years just to kind of rejuvenate it. But this plant was huge. It was about 6 feet tall. And so I just took it all the way down to the ground. I'm trying to get out of not make a shadow, but hopefully you can see how black all of this is. And that is due to the honeydew that's created by the scale as they feed. The honeydew falls down onto the bark and all the foliage that's underneath it and creates that black burnt appearance. So if you have beautyberries and crepe myrtles in your landscape, make sure you go outside and take a look at them. I need to treat mine. If you haven't treated, now is the perfect time, because look at all this growth starting to put on new growth. And unfortunately, mine got bit back a little bit night before last. You see how that's kind of damaged and withered? So my crepe myrtles didn't fare well. My cannas did not fare well. Look how wilty and dark they are. You got to be tough if you want to make it in my garden. You got to be tough. Here's another one of those spring blooming plants we talked about. This is a type of viburnum. It's not the one most people call a snowball bush. It's arrow leaf viburnum, or viburnum acerifolia, I think is what it is, because the leaves look like a maple leaf. But they have really pretty little blooms. So if this ever got out of control or needed pruning, I should not have pruned it in the winter time or a month or so ago. I should wait until after it gets done blooming to do any kind of control on it there. Okay, so we covered pruning pretty good. What else did I want to show y'all out here? Pruning. Oh yeah, dividing plants or doing cuttings. Ugh.
Also layering.
Okay.
What was that?
So this is that patch of black-eyed Susans that I had showed y'all that were much smaller in the picture, because I took that picture a few weeks ago. So if I wanted to dig this up and share some with a friend, it's really easy. You can see each individual little plant if you pull them back. See, they make a little rosette, so you can tell. But I like to get several plants. You know, don't be greedy, right? Let's share.
I need some.
Okay, we can have some. I'm videoing with one hand and digging with the other, so I hope it's not horrible. And so there is a brand new plant. And in a year or so, it's going to be happy in somebody else's yard, and it's going to be spreading itself all about. I love things to intermingle. Here's another good example right beside it. This is some yarrow, and this was the original clump. And look how it's making babies. Here's a baby. Here's a baby. Here's some babies right here. So we could do the same thing. I'm not going to dig them up because I don't have a pot ready to put them in. But you could do the same thing there. Now let's talk about layering and softwood cuttings. So I've done layering before with my Weigelia, and its new growth is not particularly soft wooded. However, I find that it's easy to layer because these limbs just grow so crazy, and practically the lower ones lay themselves on the ground. So if we were going to layer, I'm going to try to do this one-handed. Hope you can see it. Here's my cutter, my pruner, and I'm going to take my pruner and kind of scuff up the underside of this stem right there. So now you can see, hopefully, that I peeled back that first layer of bark there. And I would take that area and make sure that it comes in contact. Woo, too much foliage. Make sure that it comes in contact with the soil. See how I've pulled a place of mulch back right here? I'm going to lay that down right there in the soil. I'm going to cover it back up. And if I had a rock or a brick, I'd put it right on top of there. And what that does is ensures that that cut area of the stem remains in good constant contact with the soil. And it could take several weeks, maybe even a month or so, before that layer takes root, especially if it's a hardwood like this Weigelia was.
Now I'm going to show you an example, just a quick one, of taking a softwood cutting. So this is my beautiful Miss Kim lilac. Look how pretty, y'all, and it smells so good. And the frost did not even touch it. And so I am advocating for this cultivar. It's on the north side of the house. It was exposed and it is not blinking in the face of danger. So if you're looking for a good hardy lilac, Miss Kim is a good choice. So you can see here, the new growth or new wood is really pliable. It's green, it flexes. If you look onto the inside, it gets a lot harder and what we would call woody. So if I were going to try to take a tip cutting and root this, I would definitely use the newest growth, this terminal growth here. And when you make a cutting, you want to, again, make your cut where you have new growth coming out on either side. You see that right there? There's a leaf coming out to the left and a leaf coming out to the right. And that's the kind of cut that you want to leave on your plant to have a healthy cut. However, on your cutting, this does us no good. This area from here to the next set of leaves doesn't do anything for us because there are no auxin chemicals in that segment. So what we're going to do is cut it off. And then this is what it should look like. And you remove these leaves. And right there at that junction is where those growth hormones are going to concentrate themselves. You could dip this in a rooting hormone. I would probably remove these leaves as well because all that's doing is taking energy from the plant. Could dip that in a root hormone and put it in some soil, or you could even try just putting this in some water, keeping that water fresh, and seeing if you can get some roots to sprout out that way. So those are my quick tips for pruning and propagation. And then I also wanted to show you just real quickly the very last thing. I know I've probably kept y'all longer than an hour. This is kind of my garden table here. This is 1 cup of triple 15. I'm using an all-purpose fertilizer in my garden because that's what my soil sample recommended. And it also said to use approximately 1 cup of this product per 100 square feet of garden area. My bed here is approximately 6 feet wide from my porch to the perimeter of my bed. And then I'm going to take, help me do some math. I'd need 6, 12, 18, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So this is approximately 100 square feet. It's not as much as you would think it is. You would say, oh, that's a huge area, but it's really not. I took 5 big steps. That was, you know, a yard each times 6. That got me somewhere in the range of 100. 6 times, yeah. So it's really easy what you do. You don't have to have a fancy spreader or anything like that. I usually take some in my hand and I just do like this and let it fall out of my hand. I start out light at first, making my way across the area because I don't want to use it all up before I've covered everything. Get some back here in the back. And it's best if you can apply your fertilizer before a good rain. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but I'm just hoping that you can see the fertilizer as I'm throwing it out there. All right. And my fertilizing for that 100 square foot of the garden is done. So don't make it more complicated than it has to be. I know sometimes it can be a little intimidating, but that is all there is to it. So let me change my screen around. And I will say, I hope everybody had fun. And I hope you enjoyed the going outside portion of our talk. And if you have questions, feel free to ask me. I'll stay on for a few minutes if anybody wants to talk. Okay, good deal. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm back inside. So if anybody has anything, just away.
Hey Celeste, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm in Weakley County. Okay, and I've had a lot of damage from this freeze, even though I covered plants and everything. What's the best thing to do? Just to let them see if they come out, or start back?
Yeah, I just would leave them for now. So I had, like I showed all the canna, my crepe myrtle. I had some perennial lantana, the Miss Huff and ham and eggs. Both of those got bit back pretty good. But I think that they're going to grow out of it because we are still really early. And most of those plants wouldn't have been this far along had we not had 90-degree weather, for a week ago. So
Yeah.
I think that they're going to be fine. And as the temperatures continue to warm, that they're going to grow out of it. I'm not sure about the canna. Hopefully they can recover from that. But
My hydrangea got bit back too.
yes. So the hydrangea, unfortunately, if you can tell the areas that are wilted, you could go ahead and prune those tips off because they're not going to, obviously they're not going to bloom. They're not going to come back, those wilted portions. And so that would improve the look of your plant. And at least you would have a nice looking plant. You just might not have as many blooms.
Okay. What about grapes?
Grapes?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I did get an email from our fruit and nut specialist, and he was saying that there was significant damage to the Tennessee vineyards from the frosts, and that he was going to keep us posted. So I'm not sure if it was, oftentimes, say for example, like in peach orchards, sometimes when we have a freeze like that, it's just enough to thin the crop. And so then that just really saves them some time. They don't have to go and thin the crop. But I'm not sure what that means, what that equates to from the grape side. So
I don't know either. They're all brown, curled up and everything. I mean, and even the stems of them are, you can tell they're just not healthy anymore.
right. Well, all I can say is I can look into that and see, what they recommend. Do we need to do some cleanup pruning? Do we leave it and let it, fall off itself? I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Also, my Mount Airy Fothergillia had only 3 blooms this year. It is normally covered in blooms. Any idea what happened? This was before the last round of frost. I love Fothergillia, but it's too humid for me to grow it. I planted it twice. It keeps dying. So don't have a lot of firsthand experience with Fothergillia. But some reasons for reduced bloom might be, did you possibly prune it last fall? Because if you pruned it last fall, then you pruned off the blooms, the wood that was going to produce blooms for this spring. No pruning ever. Okay, maybe light. Has there been any change in exposure to light? Those would be my two, my two thoughts. Oh, Lori said there was a heavy freeze in November that might have got some of them. And that's true. We did have an early freeze, and then it warmed back up that fake winter, I guess. So that might have had something to do with it too. Like the wood that was going to have the blooms on it was still alive, and the early frost nipped it before it was able to go dormant. That's a good, yeah, that could be a possibility. They said they took out the neighboring bush and it got a little more sun in the late fall. See, I would have thought increased sun would help it bloom better. So I don't think that that would have played a part in the reduced bloom. All right. All right, anybody else have anything they want to talk about? I'm trying to find ways to make it more interesting. I know nobody wants to sit on a online meeting for hours at a time, but maybe if we can change things up a little bit, it can be more interesting. Thank you, Lori. I appreciate that. Okay, well, if that's everything, then I will say good day, and we're super close to the weekend. Tomorrow's Friday, so enjoy your day, and we will see you back here next Thursday. I believe Jake Mallard is our speaker. He's going to be talking about nuisance animal control. So not attracting wildlife, things that we can do to protect our precious plants against damaging wildlife. So that'll be a fun talk, and I'm glad to have him with us next week. So just be looking on Facebook for the post, for the link, or it's the same link every time. So you can just save this one and use it from week to week, and it'll hook you up with us, okay? All right, y'all have a good day.